Hi everybody. In Unit 4, we're going to be talking about the structure of the Psalms. And so, while we might not exactly think that structure would be all that important, it does play a role in how we interpret and read the Psalms. And so we want to look at three main structures in this lecture: acrostics, chiasms, and strophes. And we'll define what each of those mean and look at some examples throughout this lecture. So in this unit, first we want to do a quick review of parallelism, just to make sure we're understanding the basic unit of Hebrew poetry. And so we're going to look at some poetic lines and how psalm versification differs, particularly between the Hebrew Bible and our English versions, because the versification is different between those. So we want to take a look at that, just so you're aware. There are three types of structures within the Psalms. You saw in the title slide. Those are going to be acrostics, chiasms, and strophes. So we'll look at those. And then why structure matters and why that is so important. So let's jump in to an overview of Hebrew poetry, parallelism, lines, and versification. So what is parallelism? It's the most fundamental form of Hebrew poetry. Poems are written in two lines, sometimes three, that relate to one another in one of several ways. These parallel lines comprise the basic unit of Hebrew poetry. So as an example of this, look at Psalm 19:1. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the sky above proclaims his handiwork. This is from the ESV, but you'll notice this first line talks about the heavens declaring the glory of God. Okay, so what does the second line do? The sky proclaims his handiwork. So these things are synonymous: heaven, sky, the glory of God, God's handiwork. So we see this parallelism where we have kind of the same idea repeated in different ways. So the ideas rhyme in parallelism. That's the main point we want to look at, is that in parallelism, these two lines work together. So we have an A line and a B line, as you see from the arrows that came up on the screen. That's basically parallelism in a nutshell. We'll cover that more in other units, but we did want a quick review so that you understand the basic unit of what we're working with and how this unit now comes into the idea of the larger structures within the Psalms. So there's also versification. Let's look at this really quickly. Versification refers to the way verse numbers are assigned, and it's not standardized, okay? I know when you read in your English versions, it looks like it's standardized. You would think it's not, and in fact, we have evidence that the versifications were shifting and changing over time. So the Hebrew Bible verses and chapters for Psalms actually differ from the English versions in many ways, and so we don't need to go into the details of that, but just to know that sometimes when you're reading your commentaries, you'll notice that they might reference a particular psalm with, say, they might say Psalm 8, and then in brackets or something, they'll say Psalm 9. Well, that the brackets to the 9 is to the Hebrew version, so they're giving you both references depending on which version you want to use. So the verse numbers don't always correspond to the lines or structure of the poetry either. So just keep this in mind as you're reading. And this is where I would encourage you to maybe even try to find a version, or if you have Logos, you can turn off verse numbers. So to get rid of those verse numbers so you can actually see the poetry. And that's what I'm trying to get at here, is with the versification. We look at these numbers, and these numbers in our minds, whether we intended or not, affect the way we read Psalms. So sometimes it's handy if we can try to get rid of those numbers, the verse numbers that is, to read the Psalm differently. And that's, so you can do that very easily in Logos, or if you're using there's some versions of the Bible that don't have the chapters and numbers. And I find those to be beneficial sometimes when you're reading poetry especially. Okay, so that is the preliminary material. Let's get to the heart of this lecture. Three types of structures in the Psalms. We have acrostics, we have chiasms, and strophes. Now, not every psalm is going to fall within one of these categories, but these are the three predominant structures that we find within the Psalter. So first up, acrostics. Acrostics usually begin with successive letters of the Hebrew alphabet. So in English, that would be A, B, C, obviously. In Hebrew, their alphabet goes alpha. In Hebrew, their alphabet goes Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet. And these acrostic poems show a masterful level of artistry. Can you imagine trying to write a poem where each line begins with the next letter of the alphabet. The immense amount of vocabulary alone that would take. And there are 9 such poems in the Psalms. You'll see here listed out 9, 10, 25, 34, 37, 111, 112, 119, and 145. And in fact, in a lot of our English Bibles, Psalm 119 is demarcated by the Hebrew letter headings. So Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet. And it's not just successive lines, but sections, or in this case, strophes, which we'll talk about in a minute, where Psalm 119 is broken up by the letter of the alphabet that each line begins with. These 9 psalms span the genres of praise, wisdom, lament, and thanksgiving. And so it says, let's look at Psalm 34 and 119. I will let you look at Psalm 119. It's the longest chapter in the whole Bible. I can't fit it on a slide. In fact, it would take many, many slides to try to get that whole thing on there. But I would encourage you, either pause the video at this point or after we finish discussing Psalm 34 here in a second, and go take a look at Psalm 119 to kind of get an idea of what I mean. And you'll see the headings there. All right? So let's look at Psalm 34. Now, I'm not expecting you to read the Hebrew, and I know this is very tiny, but in order to get all the verses on here, so I could show you this, it just ended up being kind of tiny. But what I did want to put is the Hebrew and the English side by side so you can see what I'm talking about. Not just about the acrostic, but also the versification. This is different. So in the Hebrew side, you'll see verse 1 says, La David, or to David, or as the CSB here translates it, concerning David. But what you'll notice is that's verse 1. But in our English version, there's no verse. It's a heading. So that's one way versification changes. So in our English version, we only have 22 verses, but in the Hebrew, it has 23. And this is one of the ways where Psalms differs, as that we, in English, treat those headings as not verses. So just to make you aware of that. But then you'll notice on the Hebrew side, each first word, and remember, Hebrew reads from right to left. So in this example, we're reading from the center out. So the Hebrew reads right to left, and the English reads left to right, okay? And so what we're going to look at is those, beside the numbers there, the bold words. If you look at the first letter, not that I'm expecting you to read Hebrew, but it is Aleph, Beit, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yod, and that's the Hebrew alphabet, straight down. Every verse begins with a successive letter of the Hebrew alphabet. You can't see that in the English, unfortunately, but it is there. And so I want to make you aware of this, because this is just an incredible amount of artistry that it takes to do this type of poem. So that is one type. And what you get with these types of poems is a very structured ordering. Like almost a listing. Not that the poem reads as a listing, but almost like just a serial listing of the alphabet. So you just see the work and the thought that went into this poem. It makes you stop and think. This poet, this author of this psalm, really spent the time to write down what they meant. So it moves beyond sheer emotion. A craft and a skill of artistry involved in these acrostic poems. As I said, Psalm 119 is a great example of an acrostic poem where the sections actually are maintained in our English Bible with headings. So at this point, if you want to, pause the video, go take a look at Psalm 119 in your own version of the Bible and see what I mean. Okay, so the next type of poetic structure that we find in the Psalms is a chiasm. Chiasm is a structure that we can find elsewhere in the Old Testament, so it's not just in poetry, but in poetry, what you get are these parallel sections that work toward the middle and then come back out again. And so you'll see from this outline here, you have like an A section, then a B section, then a C section. And then as we come back toward A, we go B prime, A prime. And usually the C section, or the middle section, is the most important information. It's at the center for a reason. You know, in English, we tend to put the really important stuff at the beginning or the really important stuff at the end. But in this type of structure, the most important thing is in the middle. All right. And it's not always ABC. It could always go up to F or G or however you want to, how many sections there are. It can vary. But this is the basic structure of a chiasm. So Psalm 92 is one example of a chiasm. All right. You have an A section in verses 1 through 5. Praise of Yahweh. You have a B section in 6, 7a. Now, I will note that these sections don't have to be even. Okay? They're not exactly always even. Sometimes they take multiple verses. Sometimes they only take one verse. Sometimes they only take a part of a verse. But if you will read, and this is where the verse numbers can really mess us up, if you will read carefully, you'll start to see these chiastic structures. So we have this B section that describes the wicked. And then we have two C sections, okay? C and a C prime. They form the middle. We have the fate of the wicked and the promise that Yahweh reigns forever. And as we back away from that, enemies and wicked destroyed, and then we have the praise of Yahweh. Now, this is an interpretive step to making these chiasms because they're obviously not written in our Hebrew Bible. So we might, we want to rework this to where we make that first C section, the fate of the wicked, part of the describing of the wicked. And then we make verse 8, Yahweh reigns forever, the center of this poem. Is another way of structuring this. But I just want to show you there's lots of ways to slice this up. It's something to look for as you're reading this poetry. So again, I know it's really small, but let's look here now at this psalm, okay? It is good to give thanks to the Lord. Sing praises to your name, O Most High. To declare your steadfast love in the morning and your faithfulness by night, to the music of the lute and the harp, to the melody of the lyre. For you, O Lord, have made me glad by your work. At the works of your hands I sing for joy. How great are your works, O Lord! Your thoughts are very deep. That is the A section in praise of Yahweh. Okay, so what about the B section? The stupid man cannot know, the fool cannot understand this, that though the wicked sprout like grass and all evildoers flourish. This is what I would have labeled as a B section. Okay, now let's get to the center. C. They are doomed to destruction forever, but you, O Lord, are on high forever. Notice the contrast here. And this is where looking at the structure of these poems really starts to bring it to life for us, okay? Look at the structure. We begin with praise of Yahweh and his works, his steadfastness. Fools and stupid people, they can't understand this. And they seem to flourish. But the contrast is they are doomed to destruction forever, but you, O Lord, are on high forever. Meaning Yahweh is not wicked. He reigns forever. And in his just judgment, these fools will not flourish. In the end, justice will be served. So there's this contrast in that C section between these two lines where the wicked are doomed, but Yahweh reigns. Okay, so we start to back away from that now. We have this B prime section. For behold your enemies, O Lord, for behold your enemies shall perish. All evildoers shall be scattered. And you see where these two B sections now are in parallel. Okay, what can they not do? They can't understand, they can't know. And therefore they will be scattered and they will perish. And now we go back to praise of Yahweh. But you have exalted my horn like that of the wild ox. You have poured over me fresh oil. My eyes have seen the downfall of my enemies. My ears have heard the doom of my assailants. The righteous flourish like the palm tree and grow like a cedar in Lebanon. They are planted in the house of the Lord. They flourish in the courts of our God. They still bear fruit in old age. They are ever full of sap and green, to declare that the Lord is upright. He is my rock, and there is no unrighteousness in him. So this psalm is full of contrasts between the wicked and the righteous, between Yahweh and those that worship him and follow after him. It's beautiful, and the contrasts are bared out in the structure of this psalm, in the chiastic structure. It just brings that contrast even more to the front. So it's night and day, it is light and dark, it is up and it is down. It's very clear. And like I said, you'll notice too that while it looks more even here in English, in the Hebrew it's not quite so even, especially with the versification. And this is where taking the verses out really helps to see the structure better. But in a nutshell, that's chiasm. So chiasm works toward a center and then backs away from that center in almost like a sideways pyramid structure. All right? So that is chiasm. Let's move on now to strophes. Strophes are the most common. They're everywhere in Psalter, and they are groups of lines contained around a single subject matter. If you're writing prose, strophes would be paragraphs, okay? They are strings of sentences about the same subject matter, and when you move to a new subject matter, you move to a new paragraph. In poetry, we have parallel lines that kind of form the sentences, or the basic unit of meaning, and then from there we have strophes that are contained around a single subject matter, and then the next strophe moves on to a new subject matter. And so we did Psalm 92. Let's just move on to Psalm 93 as we see these strophes, okay? And we have these broken up into sections, so you can kind of see these as paragraphs, so they're double spaced. But in Psalm 93, the Lord reigns. He is robed in majesty. The Lord is robed. He has put on strength as his belt. Strophe 1. Yes, the world is established. It shall never be moved. Your throne is established from old. You are everlasting. Okay? Strophe 2. Strophe 3. The floods had lifted up, O Lord. The floods have lifted up their voice. The floods lift up in their roaring. Mightier than the thunders of many waters, mightier than the waves of the sea. The Lord on high is mighty. Your decrees are very trustworthy. Holiness befits your house, O Lord, forevermore. And so you see the simplistic structure. We can kind of break this into sections and get down to basic ideas within these strophic sections. Okay? And we can assign them titles and kind of start to work on these as individual sections that contribute to the whole psalm. So as we conclude this lecture, there are some psalms that contain multiple types of structures. And the second bullet point here highlights that, Psalm 111. It's both a chiasm and an acrostic. So double artistry there. The sections of a chiasm could also be called strophes. It's a special kind of strophe because there's parallelism going on between the strophes. So not parallelism just between the lines, but also parallelism within the larger structures or the strophes. So there's special kinds of strophes. But the final point we want to make, why? Why structures? Why is this important? Because they have exegetical significance, okay? They affect the way we might interpret these psalms when we understand them better. There is meaning in structure. There's meaning in poetry. There's a famous anecdote. I believe it's about T.S. Eliot, the American poet. And he was reading a poem one night, and someone from the audience asked him, "What does it mean?" In response, T.S. Eliot read the poem again. And the point of this story is that the meaning is in the poetry itself. And this is important when we do exegesis of Psalms, is to understand that the structure and the poetry and the parallelism, these are all part of the meaning. If it could be written in prose, if it could be written in lines and sentences and paragraphs, then just do that. But if it's poetry, then the artistry of the poetry conveys part of the meaning. That's not so easy to lay your finger on. Okay, it's not easy to work with, but it's important that you understand that the art is part of the meaning. And understanding the structure of the poem deepens our insights into the message of the poem and how it is structured, how we need to understand the parts of the whole. So by taking time to examine every aspect of a poem, we gain deeper insight into the message, and that makes that message even more impactful if we understand the artistry of it. And this is something now we can take in our teaching and our preaching to convey to our congregations and to our students, to those that are under our care, that we can convey this artistry and the meaning of the poem itself. Okay, and again, this is an abstract concept that is very difficult to even put into words when we try to convey meaning through art, especially in a society where we are so prone to putting everything in plain text and sound bites and 1 minute TikToks. No, the artistry of poetry is that we have to sit with it. We have to work on it to understand it. Even the Pauline letters of the New Testament, they're so didactic. And what I mean by that is, while they are not always so easy to exegete by doing the historical analysis and understanding the situation Paul's writing a particular church about, Paul's meaning is very clear. But in poetry, part of the meaning is that we have to sit with it and sit in it and just let the poetry be part of us for a minute. And the meaning grows the more we sit with it. So as we study the Psalms, you have to spend time with them. It's not just a one and done, oh yeah, I read that, check it off. No, we sit with the poetry and we let it become part of us. And part of that is the meaning of the poem. The artistry itself, how it is conveyed to us, and how we interact with it is part of the meaning. It's not just words on a page. That concludes this lecture on the structure of Psalms. Very important material, although often overlooked or just glossed over really quickly. So we just wanted to spend one of these units on the structure of the Psalms, but that will conclude this lecture.